USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to the Game of the Week podcast for Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen 4, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Well, this week's Game of the Week is a premier matchup in the NCHC as we have number 2 North Dakota at number 11 Minnesota Duluth.
And to preview this week's Game of the Week, we're joined by Dave Starman. He will be calling the game between Minnesota Duluth and North Dakota on Friday night on CBS Sports Network, part of the NCHC package. You had an exciting one last weekend to open the slate for CBS. Now you get a really good rivalry game this week between Minnesota Duluth and North Dakota.
Oh, last week we had North Dakota and Miami, and that game turned into a great one that went into overtime and shootouts, and we like to say it's just another typical night in the nacho. I mean, that's what we get on a week-by-week basis with some of these games and some of these teams, and that's what makes that conference just a lot of fun to be around. But this week we're thinking it's a pretty good one. You got North Dakota, who might be the best team in the country right now, and they're playing the two-time defending champs who are starting to find themselves a little bit. They've had some ups and downs, and last weekend they liked from the third period Friday straight to the end of their Saturday game in terms of a lot of things that they did. And they had a weekend against Western Michigan the weekend before that produced some good things for them. And you got North Dakota that I thought last weekend probably learned a ton about themselves because they went on the road and found themselves down in both games. And one of those games they found themselves down early and had to replace their number one goalie, which was more of a wake up for the team more than an indication of how Shield was playing. But so I think North Dakota comes in this weekend with that great wake-up call that they had and will probably reaffirm their belief that they can win any kind of game. And you got Minnesota Duluth, who's got a locker room full of kids who certainly know how to win and understand what having their backs to the wall means and the response. We're excited about it. This is going to be fun.
Let's jump into North Dakota first. You were just mentioning them, and you had them last week, and you mentioned the series they had, and Brad Schlossman had the stat that they led for less than 3 minutes on the entire weekend. You pulled 5 out of 6 points out of the weekend in the NCHC standings, and that's a big weekend when you really put it all together. How much can that help a team? Just, I guess there can be two ways of looking at it. You don't want to get too confident that you can win no matter how poorly you might play at points in the game. But at the same time, knowing that you had the ability to win games when you didn't bring your A game.
That's a good point because, I've always felt that there are nights where you're not going to have your A game as a player or as a team, and you have a B game that is sustainable. And North Dakota proved that they do. And, their Friday night game, they were asleep early as a team. And the beauty for them and talking to some of those guys was, hey, listen, we knew we were down 2-0 early, but we also knew we had a lot of game left, and we like our structure and we like the way we play, and we know it's in our lineup. And they've got a mindset that whether or not if they're up 3-1, they can close, and if they're down 3-1, they can find a way to get it to 3-3. And they've got a mindset where if the game goes to overtime, it's not going any longer than the first 5 minutes because they want all the points. And I think it's a really good mindset to have, and they played to that identity. And I just think that a little of the wake-up call that they got was probably good for them, and it's probably great for the coaches because when you're going really well, sometimes you need a hiccup for the coaches to get the room back. And I think that last weekend probably gave the coaches the ears of their team a little bit more than when your team is just cruising along. And, the one kid that has really powered their engine has been Jordan Kawaguchi, who if he's not really seriously considered for the whole I'd be very surprised at this point. I mean, this kid has done everything that's been asked of him. It's been a wonderful story since his freshman year to now. And the moxie that he plays with the puck, without the puck, and the way he carries himself as a leader on that team, he's been remarkable. It's been a fun evolution to be a part of since his days as a freshman, and that line that he's playing on with the other two juniors that he's got with Mishmash and Adams. I mean, what a group that has become. And I don't know if they're the CBS line just yet of Kajula, Schmaltz, and Besser, but boy, they're making some people draw some comparisons.
What is it about Kawaguchi that stepped up his game this year? He's got double the points output and now has popped up on the national radar where maybe people had overlooked him before.
I think a couple things have happened. Number one is he's a really good athlete. Number two is he is just dialed in to make himself a better player. And with the way that North Dakota's got their practice set up and structured, there are certain days where there are skill heavy days. There are certain days that are compete heavy days. But no matter what they have done, Kawaguchi's one of those first guys on, last guys off. And the way he has exuded the leadership and demonstrated his leadership is that no matter how hard the drill is, no matter what drill it is, he's one of those kids that's first on line, and he's doing it to the, as hard as he can possibly do it. He's making sure it's right, and he's making sure that other guys are dialed in on their details. And he holds guys accountable in a very respectful way. And I think that the confidence that he has built up as a guy that can be a leader in that room, and don't forget, when you're a leader at the University of North Dakota, it's a little bit different than some other places. I mean, there's a lot of expectation that gets placed on you. It's like being the quarterback at Alabama. And you've got to hold yourself the right way because their world is watching, and it's a big one. And I think that, going through the process of kind of becoming this guy that you watch, this guy that you emulate, this guy who can walk the walk between the skill level and the compete level, I think that has been the evolution of Kawaguchi.
Let's look at the other side, Dave. In Minnesota Duluth, you mentioned two-time defending national champions, and there's been some ups and downs for that team this year. But I feel like the last 2 years, when they come out on top in April, they've had ups and downs as well. It's never really a smooth ride the entire season for Minnesota Duluth and Scotty Sandelin. Does this team just kind of typify what Minnesota Duluth is, and the fact that they'll have some hiccups in the road, but when it comes to March and April, they're usually playing pretty good hockey?
I think you can make that case. I think when you look at their roster, you can make the case that they might not be as deep as they have been in recent years. I mean, they've got players that can make a ton of plays, and they've got players that can be very, very effective. They can score a bit. Power play's been good. The goalie's terrific. I think he's about to tie an NCAA record for most consecutive starts. And so you've got some key components and some key leadership roles, but on the other hand, I think that they're a team that's had some injuries that struggle for a little bit of consistency. And as they go through the second half, the beauty of them is, like I said, they know how to win. The challenge for them is, and I think it's a really neat one to watch. The challenge for them is they've got a lot of guys on their team who have had their backs to the wall so often and have answered the bell that they know how to do it. The wonder, and I think the coaching staff wonders the same thing, is, are they a team that expects it to happen when their backs are against the wall, or are they a team that will know how to react when their backs are against the wall? There's the anticipation, the expectation, and the reaction. And I think right now they're trying to figure out which of those three components will happen once they get towards the frozen face-off and into the national tournament. Dave,
when you look at this weekend series, obviously the games being in Duluth probably can be thought of as a little bit of an advantage for the host team, but is there something that stands out to you that is the factor that will be the deciding factor in the weekend? Is it special teams? Is it the neutral zone? Is it the breakout? I mean, what do you feel when you look at these two teams and compare them? What one of the biggest factors will be?
Last weekend, North Dakota's penalty kill struggled a little bit against Miami, and one of the reasons that they thought they did struggle was because Miami had one power play unit of some really high-end guys that moved the puck extremely quickly and executed. And I know that this week they'll be digging on their PK a little bit to try to shore some things up. And even the greatest PK in the world will run into some hiccups through the course of a weekend or two. You saw it happen to Minnesota Duluth last year. Minnesota Duluth's power play, on the other hand, is really clicking pretty well right now. It's something that they feel pretty good about. So I think that coming off the Miami weekend, they're going to face another power play, which is loaded up with high-end guys. And I think the challenge right now for North Dakota is, A, can they stay out of the box and stay disciplined like they have been? Because they're one of those teams that's really on the lower end of how many times they've actually had to kill against the power play for North Dakota that's getting a little healthier and is really starting to find their groove. I think that's one of the bigger factors to watch. The smaller factor to watch for me is North Dakota's transition game. They love to play offensive. They love, for their defensemen, they love the strong side dive downs. They love getting the weak side guy involved in a roll down if the puck changes sides. I mean, they like to get their Ds involved. And there are times where they will play 4 underneath the top of the dots, and they will forecheck aggressively to the point where they'll have all 3 forwards underneath the face-off dots. Minnesota Duluth has always been a team that's played well with pace and pretty good in offensive transition. So I think much like the Miami weekend, and Miami, I thought, exposed them a little bit in this area, this will be the similar kind of situation. Can North Dakota's aggressive offensive philosophy be too much for Minnesota Duluth to handle, or will Minnesota Duluth be able to win puck battles, have good retrievals, and be able to get pucks going north quickly and catch North Dakota in transition. I think that's one of the things, actually, wise that's going to be worth watching.
Well, the game on CBS Sports Network, and you will be part of the team calling it, Ben Holden with you. And then, of course, your better half, Shireen, will be the ringside reporter. I like to think that she is the star of the crew. But you guys are together. I mean, this is a lot of years you've been doing this. How enjoyable is it to have that same team, that consistency, and the ability to broadcast these NCHC games?
You know what? It's really special. Ben, Shireen, and myself have been together. This is our 10th season together. Ben and I did one season together before that, too. So for us, it's 11. And, I mean, our chemistry is terrific. We've got an unreal producer in Carlos de Molina, who's got a closet full of Emmys from his time with the NHL and NBC. We've got a great director in Sean Jensen, who's a Boston guy. I mean, our crew, this core crew, has been together for close to 8 years, 9 years. And when you just know what everybody else is thinking, and when you just know what the battle plan is going to be week in and week out, and what the guys in your ears are going to sound like, and who's expected to do what, and who carries what load, it's like a veteran team, and that's kind of how we feel. Like, we really feel like no matter what game we get, we can bring it to the fans in a way that they can enjoy it. We can bring it to the fans in a way that we're not going to get in the way of it. And our goal in every game we do is to not make it about us. Our game is to make it about the student athletes that are in the game, to make sure that we sell the programs and explain the great things that are going on between the kids and the coaches and what these teams are doing away from the rink that makes them special. And, you know, if we manage to bring up a good point or two and we get applauded for it, we're thrilled to death. But like I said, the thing that we take a lot of pride in is being able to have fans from each team say to us, hey, I learned something about my own team this weekend from you guys. We appreciate it. And, you know, that to us is really the greatest compliment we can get.
Well, it's always fun as one of those fans that watches, whether it's on DVR or live. For me, it's always fun. And this Friday night, North Dakota, Minnesota, Duluth, it will be the game of the week for USCHO. Dave Starman, thanks for taking the time out today to join us, and we'll definitely catch up with you before the season ends.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me as always, guys, and we'll catch up as we get towards the tournament.
That's Dave Starman. He'll be the color analyst along with Ben Holden on play-by-play, Shireen Sasky ice side. And that's at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS Sports Network. More of the Game of the Week podcast coming up. We're sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Every time you show up, every time you make your presence heard, whether you clap your hands or stomp your feet, lead the chant or join the chorus. However you choose to be a fan, you make the game.
The NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 to get your tickets today.
Continuing with the Game of the Week podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, let's start out with the Game of the Week. North Dakota at UMD. Minnesota Duluth, a tough weekend last weekend, getting swept at St. Cloud. And meanwhile, North Dakota had all they could handle on the road at Miami. I think these are two teams that are really going to want to get some momentum going in the right direction, although North Dakota has pretty good momentum out of last weekend.
Yeah, they're still fine. The fact that they took 5 out of 6 points last weekend, they probably have no problem with that. The outcomes are good. How they got to the outcome, maybe they'd like to change that a little bit. For Duluth, this is kind of bad timing because you didn't play a good series last week. That was kind of the games you needed. Now you're going to play the best team in the country, arguably, in North Dakota, and that's what makes this a very difficult weekend. The fact that they're at home is good. I don't know that home ice really factors a ton for Minnesota Duluth because they've been a decent road team at times. But I just look at this series and say, man, if they don't take 3 or 4 points out of this, out of the 6 points this weekend, they're really putting themselves behind the 8 ball.
And it may be the time for a couple of players to step up, as we talked with Dave Starman. Jordan Kawaguchi having just a breakout season. You got to think he's going to be right up in there, at least Hobie finalist, if not hat trick. But don't forget defensively, Scott Perunovich for Minnesota Duluth. He's going to be mentioned in those same circles.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of high-end players this weekend, and that's kind of what makes this such an appealing matchup. You add in the fact that there is a little bit of a rivalry between these two teams. has been there since the WCHA days carries over into the NCHC. It really becomes such a marquee couple of games, and the fact that the stands will be full of professional and amateur scouts from the NHL. It's not a surprise. This is a big series with some big name players.
The other series that jumps out for me in the NCHC is number 5 Denver at Miami. We just talked about Miami. Denver had all they could handle with Omaha last weekend. 2 tie games where Denver ended up with the extra point in both. A strong Miami team, they've got to feel some real urgency to win this after what they did last weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those things that this kind of becomes a turning point weekend maybe for Miami. They did such great things last weekend, and to really come away with nothing, 1 out of 6 points, doesn't feel good. And if you do the same again this weekend and don't get points out of it, then you really feel like you just you're spinning your wheels. So I think that Miami needs to see results in the standings. That's really important. Then on Denver's side, they probably feel very good about the fact that they got 4 points out of last weekend. They easily probably could have come away with 2 or 1 or none. I mean, the way both of those games went, they were in a position to maybe lose both. And to come out with 4 points, that's a positive. Now you've got to keep that momentum going. You've got to go play a Miami team that's probably going to be hungry. If you're not hungry as Miami right now after what went down last weekend, you've got to question kind of where your excitement lies. So I guess that does really kind of stand out to me as well as a series that there will be a lot on the line for both teams. And, especially Miami, you're trying to see kind of what kind of character that team has.
As we stay out in the Western Conferences, let's go to the Big Ten. Just one matchup with a pair of ranked teams. Number 9, Penn State comes into number 19, Michigan State, having only picked up 1 out of 6 points last week at home, including a drubbing on Friday night at the hands of Michigan. Meanwhile, Michigan State really gaining some momentum. This is a great series.
It has the potential to be, certainly. And, I think there's 2 different styles here. You have a Michigan State team that plays very well defensively, has a great goaltender, and then a Penn State team that, as we talk about almost every week, really can score goals, and they like to have that up-tempo game. So it's whether Michigan State can slow Penn State down. Michigan did that very well last weekend, really kind of slowed that offense down. So that's the rub here. And if Michigan State gets to play their style of game, you could look for this to be another very difficult weekend for Penn State.
Notre Dame dropped out of the rankings this week after another tough weekend. Wisconsin split the weekend. The Badgers are at the Fighting Irish. This feels like make it or break it time for Notre Dame.
For both teams, really. Wisconsin has not really had a full weekend where they can be happy with the way that they played. And you're right, Notre Dame, you're trying to, we've been saying it for weeks now that they should be in desperation mode. They have been, but haven't come away with results. So this is a big series for both those teams.
In the WCHA, one stands out for me, and that is Bemidji at number 3, Minnesota State. It was a good weekend for Bemidji. They've gotten 5 wins in their last 6 games. Last weekend, 5 out of 6 points with Michigan Tech. The Beavers are on a roll, and Minnesota State has been consistent. This should be a great battle this weekend.
I mean, it really could be a battle that determines who wins the regular season title. When it all is said and done, this is the weekend that Bemidji State has to look to and say, listen, we sweep this. We're right there. We're in first place. We're tied for first place. Whereas Minnesota State they're saying, boy, if we sweep this weekend, we can kind of put it on cruise control a little bit for the rest of the season. Not that they will, but they're in the catbird seat if they can win 2 games this weekend. It's a very good series. This is an excellent series. This is the one that I think, I think we were all pointing toward Bowling Green and Minnesota State, but as we've seen the season kind of meld itself together and figure out who's what, the team that is going to chase Minnesota State for this season is undoubtedly going to be Bemidji State right now. So this becomes a very big 2 games.
As we go east, one series with 2 different teams, the same home team. Number 1, Cornell at Lina hosts number 20 Dartmouth on Friday, and it's cool to say number 20 Dartmouth, and number 16 Harvard on Saturday.
Yeah, big weekend at Cornell and Lina, and obviously, when I was picking the games of the week, both of those became potentials, and then you kind of look and say, well, Minnesota Duluth and North Dakota, just the rivalry there alone is a good enough reason. But I think that this is two very hard games for Cornell. These are two games that will test them. But both Dartmouth, obviously, you're now at the top, and you're finally at a position that you're getting into the national rankings. It's been a long time for Dartmouth, and you've already beat Cornell once this year, and now you're going on their home ice. You're going to travel onto the road and try to do it on the road. And then Harvard, they're trying to save something. I am so surprised at how Harvard has played over the last few weeks, because I thought after the Arizona State series that they were about to kind of turn it onto high gear, and it didn't work like that. So this is a big weekend for all three teams involved. You've got some, everybody has a little bit of skin in the game. Everybody has a reason to want to win these games.
As we turn to Hockey East, no matchups between ranked teams, but three series jump out at me. And I'm going to go through all three, and then you can just give me some quick thoughts on each. New Hampshire, home and home with number 7 UMass. Number 12, UMass Lowell, home and home with Boston University. And Maine is at number 4, BC for a pair.
I'll start with the Maine one, because I think that they've got to get their act together. They're a good home team. They've been awful on the road. They're going to be traveling down to Chestnut Hill and trying to win a game down there. It's a tall order, but if they want to solidify where they are, and you're talking about right now, if you don't start putting some wins together, you're going to be on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs. In terms of Boston University, Lowell, that has become a good series every time these two teams play. It's almost a little bit of a rivalry. BU would never say that Lowell's their rival, but I bet Lowell would say that BU is one of their biggest rivals. And then the last one, UMass and UNH, this is a UNH team that's played well. They had kind of a stumble last week at home against Providence after winning on Friday night. I wouldn't be surprised to see them take one of these games. They have the talent. It's just whether they can put everything together for one night.
Let's turn to Atlantic hockey. Sacred Heart, who we'll get to when we talk about the Connecticut Ice Tournament, is off, giving an opportunity for a couple of teams to gain some ground, and those are AIC and Army. American International has a pair at Robert Morris. Army West Point is at Niagara. Niagara really has been a disappointment this season, and this should be an opportunity for Army to get 6 points or at least close to it. AIC and Robert Morris, Robert Morris has been strong but spotty. Again, a chance for American International, who could pull into a tie with Sacred Heart and still with a game in hand.
Yeah, we talked to Eric Lang earlier this week, and that was kind of the point that I tried to emphasize is, games in hand matter, and they have the best winning percentage right now in the league. Now it's about winning the games in hand. That begins this weekend. So Robert Morris, that's going to be a tough test. I think that they always seem to get up for some of the bigger games. I think Derek Schooley is very good at motivating his players. As you mentioned, Army, these are kind of those games you have to win. I know that I don't want to take anything away from Niagara not having the best year, obviously, but when you're looking at the potential to win a championship, the biggest thing is you have to win those games against the teams at the bottom of the standings. Niagara presents that opportunity this week, so we'll see where those games go. And the fact that Sacred Heart is playing non-league games this weekend, it has the potential to really tighten up this Atlantic hockey standings.
Let's go to some non-conference games. Premier Series number 13, Arizona State at number 8, Clarkson. Arizona State has a terrific home record, not as good on the road. I can see why. They have a terrific home ice advantage in a small rink with a low ceiling. Any team that goes in there thinking they're going to loft the puck down the ice is in for a rude awakening as they hit the ceiling time after time. But Clarkson comes off a split, Dartmouth picking up a game against them last weekend. I expect this is going to be a tough, hard-fought series with two teams that can get up and down the ice really fast.
Agreed. I think Clarkson, I do think that they're the heavier team in this matchup, but they have some good speed. And then you have Arizona State that loves to use their speed. So I'll be interested to see how well Arizona State can defend. That kind of is the one thing when you talk to their coach, Greg Powers, the one thing he really emphasizes is their team defense. And if they're able to defend against a high potent offense like Clarkson, that's an impressive step. But they've got to start finding ways to win games away from home. You mentioned that point right off the top. And this becomes one of those series that if you can pull at least pull 2 points out of it. You got to get the split if you're Arizona State, and then you put yourself in very good position. Should help them in the pairwise, even if they don't sweep the series.
Yeah, pairwise is paramount for them at this point because that's the only way into the tournament, and Clarkson will help them more than just about anybody left on their schedule. Let's turn to Connecticut ice. We have games on Saturday and Sunday. First round is Quinnipiac taking on UConn. Yale takes on Sacred Heart, and then the winners of those games will play, and the losers of those games will play on Sunday. A new tournament being held at the home ice of Sacred Heart Webster Bank Arena.
Yeah, and it's getting a lot of publicity, down there in Connecticut. Whatever Sportsnet out of New York is going to televise it. That's a good positive to kind of give these programs the exposure. I hope that the attendance is good. Obviously, what they're trying to do here is kind of mimic what the Bean Pot does. And obviously, when you're talking about that, you're talking about the Boston Garden, and you're talking about, the 13 to 15 to 18,000 fans every night. That's not what this tournament is going to draw to start. But, can they build on this? Can they make this a tournament that's successful? It would be good to get, kind of that New Haven rivalry in the final, a Quinnipiac-Yale game in the championship. I think that would be the best thing. But, all 4 teams are going to go in there pretty competitive. And you look at it, I think, easily Sacred Heart could be one of the more competitive of the 4 teams. I think that, when you think about it, you think the Atlantic hockey team, they'll get run over. But when you look at each team's position in their own league standing, Sacred Heart is the best team. So we'll see if that plays out in a non-conference setting, in a championship type of setting. But I think it should be fun hockey down there.
You got to be looking for 2 guys named Cotton and Tugnut who can put the puck in the back of the net for Sacred Heart. I would not be surprised to see Sacred Heart come away with an upset in this whole thing.
And I don't know if it's an upset. That's the whole thing of it is, Quinnipiac's been a pretty good team this year. They've had their ups and downs. Yale has not had a good season to this point. UConn has been, average to, streaky to, at times above average, but not really that good of a team in hockey. So when you look at it, I'm not sure if it's an upset if Sacred Heart were to win this tournament.
Well, let's turn to one more non-conference game, and that's a rivalry matchup on Saturday. The Mayor's Cup being played in Albany between Union College from Schenectady and Rensselaer from Troy. Union just 6-17-2 on the season. RPI turning things around a little bit at 10-12-1 and 7-7-1 in the ECAC. It's been a rough year for Union. This is a grudge match for these 2 teams.
It should be, and these have been some really hotly contested games going back a few years. I don't feel like over the last 4 or 5 years it's been as much animosity between these 2 teams. But right now you're looking at 2 teams that aren't having a good year, and if you can find a way to save your season by saying you won the Mayor's Cup, the rivalry series, the game that your fans really care about, well, that's a positive. So I would hope that both of these teams put forth a really good effort.
That's it for the Game of the Week podcast. We've been sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit USCHO.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.